I remember the first time I saw the entrance to the Obsidian Halls. It wasn't marked on any map I had ever seen, not in the tattered cartography tucked into the corners of old libraries, nor in the whispered accounts traded in the ale-soaked inns of the northern towns. It appeared like a jagged wound in the earth, a sheer wall of black glass glinting even in the meager light of the forest beyond. I had felt the pull before I knew what it was. A slow, insistent tug at the edges of my mind, like the world itself was trying to whisper a secret I could not yet understand. And when I stepped closer, I saw it. Reflections that were almost not reflections. Shadows moving just beneath the surface of the obsidian, as if the stones themselves were alive, breathing, watching. The first few steps inside the halls were deceptively calm. The ground beneath my boots was uneven but firm, the way rock sometimes is when it has been carved by unseen hands for untold centuries. The walls rose impossibly high on either side, their obsidian surfaces jagged and irregular, catching the faint light from a lantern I had brought and fracturing it into prismatic shards that danced across the cavern. Every footfall echoed, an echo that seemed to stretch and twist in ways my mind could not rationalize. Sometimes I could hear more than my own movement. Faint whispers, almost on the edge of comprehension, curled around the echoes. I told myself it was the acoustics playing tricks, or my imagination. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative that something else was listening was unbearable. As I ventured deeper, the air thickened, humid and metallic, carrying a scent that reminded me uncomfortably of blood and iron. I tried to trace its source, but there was none I could find, only an all-pervading presence that seemed to saturate the halls themselves. And then I saw them, the first of the shapes. They were not entirely shadows, nor entirely substance, but something between, shifting at the edges of my vision. Every time I turned to face them directly, they vanished, leaving only the cold, hard reflection of my own face staring back at me. It was disorienting, maddening even, and yet I could not stop myself from moving toward the darker recesses from which they seemed to emerge. Curiosity had become a compulsion, a hunger I could no longer control. I found my first obstacle not long after. A fissure in the obsidian floor split the cavern, wide enough that a misstep would mean a fall into the yawning darkness below. I traced its edge carefully, my fingers brushing against the glossy black stone, feeling vibrations that weren't mine. They thrummed faintly, like the heartbeat of something ancient, something awake. It was then I realized that the halls were not merely a place, but a living entity, patient and indifferent, waiting to see what I would do, whether I would survive or become part of it. I stepped over the fissure with deliberate caution, every muscle in my body tensed. Yet a part of me felt the thrill of stepping into the unknown, like the first page of a book whose ending was hidden in shadow. Hours passed, or maybe days. I could not tell. Time in the halls was slippery, liquid, folding in on itself in ways that made sense only after the fact, if ever. I kept moving forward because I could not stop. Each turn revealed new corridors, new formations of jagged obsidian that glinted like shards of nightmares. Sometimes I thought I could hear footsteps behind me, not echoing my own but deliberate, paced, measured. My skin prickled, my hair standing on end. When I spun around, there was nothing. Nothing except for the whispering walls and the sharp glimmer of the stone. It was in one of these corridors that I first discovered the carvings. Faint at first, almost invisible against the reflective black, intricate lines etched into the stone. Symbols I could not decipher, twisting forms that suggested faces frozen in screams or laughter, or perhaps both at once. I traced them with my fingertips, feeling the grooves, the subtle undulations beneath my touch. The closer I examined them, the more I felt a pull in my mind, as if the carvings were trying to speak in a language older than words, older than thought itself. I felt dizzy, my pulse pounding, and I had to step back, breathe, remind myself that I was not losing my mind, or at least not yet. The halls, however, had no intention of letting me rest. Soon the temperature dropped. My breath became visible, misting in the unnatural darkness, and the whispers grew louder. At first, they were indecipherable, a murmur beneath the echoes of my steps. Then words began to form, slithering into my consciousness without permission. Turn back. Leave now. You are not ready. The warnings were faint, almost polite, and yet carried an undercurrent of menace that made my blood run cold. I wanted to obey. My rational mind screamed at me to retreat, to leave the cursed place before it consumed. You can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages and voices. Change the speed and the pitch of the voice. You can even tweak the SSML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech. Surface of a dream I had once almost remembered. Then it happened, the first real test. The pool rippled violently, the surface breaking into shards of black glass that cut the air with a whispering scream. I leapt back, heart pounding, as something emerged. It had no clear form, a writhing mass of shadows and jagged edges, eyes glinting like molten glass. Its presence pressed against my mind, filling it with 1,000 voices all speaking at once. Fears, regrets, unspoken sins. My own thoughts were drowned in the chorus. I ran. Not because I had the choice, but because the halls allowed it. The creature followed, or perhaps I followed it, and the distinction mattered less the faster I moved. Corridors twisted in ways that defied geometry, turning back on themselves, forming loops and false exits. Every step I took echoed with the memory of those who had walked here before, their despair trailing me like smoke. I could almost feel their hands on my shoulders, guiding or pushing me toward the inevitable. And then I saw the door. Another one. Like the first, it shimmered as if liquid, smooth and unyielding at the same time. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, and the shadows recoiled slightly as though aware of my intent. The door slid open without sound, revealing a spiral staircase carved directly from obsidian. It descended into darkness so complete that my lantern was swallowed whole. I hesitated, but the whispers urged me forward. Some part of me wanted to obey, to see what lay beneath, even knowing the cost. The stairs were treacherous, uneven, and slick with condensation. I slipped more than once, catching myself just in time. Every step seemed to echo through the halls in ways that were almost alive. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, always reminding me that the labyrinth was aware. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, as if breathing, and I realized with growing horror that the halls were more than stone and shadow. They were sentient. They were waiting for me to falter. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a vast chamber. This one smelled of earth and smoke, a copper tang lingering in the air. Statues lined the walls, impossible humanoid forms, faces frozen in silent screams or ecstasy, arms reaching toward some unseen light. I moved among them carefully, feeling the weight of their gazes even though their eyes were hollow. The floor was littered with fragments of obsidian, tiny shards that crunched underfoot, each one whispering its own secret, its own fear. In the center of the chamber lay a pool of light, warm and inviting, contrasting sharply with the oppressive darkness around it. And in that light, I saw it. The first sign of the kingdom that had supposedly lain sealed beneath the halls for centuries. Ruins of what had once been grandeur, arches and pillars, carved with symbols similar to those I had seen on the walls above. And on the far side of the pool, a pedestal. Atop it rested an object that glimmered faintly, a crystal or gemstone, impossible to define, yet compelling. I felt my legs move of their own accord, drawing me closer, ignoring the warnings that screamed at me from every corner of the chamber. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. They were not unified but fragmented, each shard of sound a different voice, each voice carrying a different truth. "Turn back," some said. "It is not meant for you," others warned. Yet another chorus murmured, "Claim it, take it, know it." I reached out my hand, the tips of my fingers trembling as they hovered over the crystal. And then I felt it. A presence unlike any I had encountered, not just aware, but conscious, intelligent, calculating. The halls themselves seemed to pulse beneath my feet, resonating with the rhythm of the object's heartbeat. The moment my fingers brushed the crystal, everything changed. The chamber seemed to breathe, expand, and contract at once. The statues turned toward me, their hollow eyes glowing with a faint inner light. Shadows leapt from wall to wall, forming shapes I could barely comprehend. Creatures with too many limbs, faces that split and multiplied, eyes that stared directly into my soul. My mind reeled, but a dark exhilaration surged through me. The crystal hummed with power, and for a moment, I felt as though I could see everything. The history of the halls, the kingdom that had been sealed here, the countless explorers who had fallen before me, and even the whispers of what lay beyond the labyrinth itself. And then the shadows attacked. They moved with impossible speed, swarming, clawing at my body and mind. I screamed, though it was swallowed instantly by the cavern, echoing endlessly into the void. Pain erupted where their touch connected, not physical so much as mental, a tearing at the edges of perception. I fought, staggering back, holding the crystal tightly, desperate to maintain some tether to reality. The statues wrenched themselves from the walls, toppling with an eerie creak, and I realized the entire chamber was alive with menace. The halls were not content to simply trap me. They wanted to consume me, reshape me, make me part of their eternal labyrinth. I ran again, the crystal clutched to my chest, shadows clawing at my heels. Corridors twisted endlessly, looping and folding in on themselves. Each step threatened to throw me into pits of obsidian shards, walls of jagged glass, or into the waiting grasp of unseen horrors. Yet through it all, I felt the pull of the kingdom below, of the secrets the crystal promised. I was caught between survival and the insatiable hunger to uncover the truth, even as every instinct screamed that the price would be unimaginable. Eventually, I stumbled into a new chamber, one unlike any I had yet seen. The walls were polished so perfectly that they reflected not my image, but fragments of other times and places. I saw myself walking these halls before I had ever entered, falling, rising, screaming, crying. I saw explorers I had never met, their fates written on their distorted reflections. And I saw the kingdom itself, rising in ghostly vision. Towers of obsidian and crystal, streets paved with black glass, a throne room bathed in impossible light. The whispers had become coherent, urgent. Claim it, survive, become part of what is eternal. And in that moment, I understood. The Obsidian Halls were not simply a labyrinth, a prison, or a treasure trove. They were a test, an endless gauntlet, a consciousness that demanded participation. To enter was to gamble not just with life, but with the essence of being. I had already touched the crystal. I had already begun the descent into something that would change me forever. There was no turning back. I pressed onward, the crystal clutched tightly against my chest, its hum a constant rhythm in my mind. The whispers had changed. No longer mere warnings or taunts, they now spoke as if acknowledging me personally, as if the halls had finally recognized me as a participant rather than an intruder. You belong here. You are ready. The words were both comforting and horrifying, for I knew that what they meant was a surrender, not of body, but of self. The corridors ahead narrowed into tunnels so tight I had to squeeze my shoulders to pass. Every step caused shards of obsidian to scrape my skin, leaving shallow cuts that stung like fire. Blood mingled with the ever-present dust and moisture, dark streaks that disappeared almost as soon as they formed, absorbed into the stone as if it had never been there. It was then I realized that the halls had no need for my pain or suffering. It had no need for my existence in any conventional sense. The halls only needed me to be aware, to observe, to interact. In this place, consciousness itself was currency. I stumbled into a cavern so vast it swallowed the lantern's light, the crystal my only guide. In the center, a lake of obsidian stretched farther than I could see, its surface completely still, reflecting nothing. Not me, not the lantern, not the ceiling above. It was a void made tangible, and instinct screamed at me to turn back. But curiosity was a hunger I could no longer suppress. The whispers converged into a single, coherent voice. The kingdom awaits. Cross and you will see. I stepped onto the surface of the obsidian lake, and to my astonishment, it held. It was solid, yet soft, yielding slightly under my weight, almost like walking on a dream. The crystal pulsed with light, guiding my path across the impossible expanse. Shadows rose from the edges of the lake, fluid, undulating shapes that tried to distract me, pull me under. I fought against the temptation to look at them, focusing only on the far side, where I glimpsed towers of obsidian rising from the darkness. The kingdom, halfway across, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, faceless, entirely black, yet moving with a grace that made my blood run cold. It spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Why do you persist? Others have fallen. Others have been consumed. What makes you think you are different? I stumbled but did not fall. The crystal pulsed in response to my fear, its light expanding, illuminating the figure in jagged glimmers. I must see, I replied, though the words sounded hollow even to me. The figure advanced, and I felt the lake beneath me ripple with its presence. Shadows reached for me, thin tendrils slicing the air, threatening to pull me into the void beneath the obsidian surface. I held the crystal higher, its warmth spreading into my hands, into my chest. Then see, the figure said, voice now a chorus of thousands. But know the cost. The far shore came into view, a throne room unlike any earthly structure. Its obsidian walls rose impossibly high, adorned with carvings that shifted subtly as I looked at them, depicting scenes of triumph, despair, and twisted revelry. At the center, a throne larger than any I had seen, carved from black crystal, pulsing with the same rhythm as my own heartbeat. And seated upon it was the ruler of this forgotten kingdom, a being draped in shadow, yet radiating authority, the air around it thick with expectation. I reached the shore, the shadows parting reluctantly, and stepped into the throne room. Every footfall echoed like thunder, yet no sound left my mouth. The crystal pulsed violently, synchronizing with the heartbeat of the throne, as if demanding acknowledgement, recognition, submission. I could feel the halls watching, the kingdom observing, and the throne expecting. The ruler spoke, though its mouth did not move. You have come far, mortal. Few have made it this deep. Do you understand what lies before you? I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my limbs trembling. I want to know, I whispered, though the sound seemed inadequate. The shadows in the room shifted, forming figures around me. Explorers who had come before, their forms half consumed by obsidian, their eyes hollow yet alive with awareness. Many sought knowledge, many sought power, many sought freedom, the throne said. All became part of the halls. None returned. Why should you be different? I felt their gazes press against me, accusatory, pleading, warning. Yet the crystal pulsed in my hands, thrumming with energy I could not define. Its warmth seeped into my chest, filling the empty spaces in my mind, urging me forward. Because I will endure, I said, louder this time, a defiance that surprised even me. Because I must. For the first time, the throne's presence wavered. Shadows quivered, the whispers faltered, and the halls seemed to pause, curious, assessing. It had never encountered someone with such determination, someone willing to confront the darkness not just with fear, but with insistence. The throne rose slowly, a vast monolith of black crystal. Light shimmered along its edges, revealing fragments of history embedded within. The rise of the kingdom, the sealing of the halls, the fate of those who had walked before me. Each scene pressed against my mind, demanding attention, and yet the crystal in my hands acted as a shield, filtering the images, letting only what I could endure pass through. You have touched the crystal, the throne intoned. It chooses its bearer, binds you to the halls. Do you accept? I looked down at my hands, feeling the pulse of power, the hum of the halls, the weight of countless eyes upon me. To reject would mean retreat, likely death, but to accept meant becoming something more, something terrifying, something eternal. The whispers swirled in my mind, a storm of voices. Accept, endure, become. I raised the crystal, and in that moment, I felt it merge with me, not physically but in essence. Knowledge, visions, and sensations flooded my mind. I saw the kingdom in its glory and decay, felt the lives of the explorers who had fallen before me, sensed the hunger of the halls and its infinite patience. My thoughts intertwined with the labyrinth, my consciousness entwined with its pulse. I was no longer merely a visitor. I was part of it, and yet I retained myself. A fragment of my humanity, fragile and defiant, clung to my mind. I realized that this was the balance, the test, the ultimate revelation. The halls did not merely consume, they refined. Those who succumbed to fear, who yielded to despair, were lost. Those who endured, who embraced the darkness without surrendering their essence, became something else. Something eternal, something that could navigate the labyrinth without being trapped by it. I stepped forward, my reflection fracturing across the obsidian walls. The shadows bowed, the whispers hushed, and the throne acknowledged me, not as a subject, but as an equal. The crystal pulsed one final time, and I felt a surge of understanding. The kingdom was not merely a place. It was a consciousness, a symbiosis of stone, shadow, and those who dared to face it. I had become part of the halls. The transformation was subtle at first, like a faint shift in the air. The edges of my vision blurred, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw shapes, faces, moving just outside the reach of my perception. But when I blinked, they were gone. The pulse of the crystal had become a part of me, its rhythm now intertwined with my heartbeat, steady, relentless. I felt its weight in my chest, like the beating of something ancient and alive. As I stood there, before the throne, the whispers returned, louder, clearer, like a chorus of voices rising in unison. The words were no longer fragmented, scattered, but whole, clear, resonating with the weight of eternity. You have chosen. Now witness what lies beneath. The halls groaned as if waking from a long slumber. The walls shifted, the corridors rearranging themselves as though the labyrinth itself were stretching and shifting to accommodate me, to adapt to my new role within it. The shadows no longer recoiled from me. Instead, they swirled around my form, a strange symbiosis, as if I were both invader and ruler. I moved, the ground beneath my feet soft yet firm, the obsidian shifting beneath my boots with a sound like a whispering sigh. The crystal pulsed again, and I followed its call. The whispers were no longer warnings. They were guidance. My steps grew confident, measured, as though I had always known this path, as though I had always belonged here. The deeper I ventured, the more I understood. The kingdom hidden beneath the halls was not just a forgotten city. It was an entity, a living thing, and I was its new heart. It had taken millennia to create this labyrinth, this tomb, and it had waited for someone like me. Someone who could endure, someone who could survive the descent into madness, and in doing so become more than human. I came to another chamber, vast and circular. The walls covered in the same shifting, intricate carvings that had haunted me since my first step into the labyrinth. But here, the carvings were different. They told stories, endless cycles of triumph and destruction, of kings and queens who had ruled this kingdom before it fell into ruin. Faces of the long dead stared down at me from the walls, their eyes hollow but knowing, their expressions twisted in silent agony or joy, frozen in time, yet there was a sense of recognition in them. You are one of us now, they seemed to whisper. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, this one entirely different from the others. It was not obsidian but a strange material that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, casting faint, shifting shadows across the chamber. Upon it rested a book, ancient, bound in some kind of dark leather, its pages turning even though there was no wind to stir them. The whispers grew louder, their voices a torrent now, a cacophony of memories and desires. Take it, they urged. Learn. Understand. Become the ruler you were always meant to be. I hesitated for only a moment before I reached for the book. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, the room seemed to collapse inward, the air thick with power, the shadows twisting around me like tendrils. The crystal in my chest pulsed in time with the beating of my heart, louder, faster, as if it were demanding something from me. The book's cover cracked open of its own accord, and the pages began to turn, revealing ancient symbols, the language of the kingdom that had once ruled this subterranean world. The symbols were not merely words. They were alive, shifting and changing as my mind tried to grasp their meaning. The halls whispered again, urging me to look closer, to see the truth. This is the key. This is the knowledge you seek. I began to read. The words filled my mind, flooding my consciousness with visions, memories not my own, of a time long past, of the kingdom that had once flourished beneath the earth. The city was not merely a collection of stone and glass, but a living organism, its heart a sentient force that thrived on the energy of its inhabitants. The rulers, whoever they were, had sought immortality, not through the preservation of flesh, but through the fusion of mind and stone, becoming one with the labyrinth itself. I saw their downfall, too, how the kingdom had grown too hungry, too powerful, until the very walls of the halls had rebelled, turning against them, sealing them away, trapping them in the labyrinth for eternity. The last of them had been consumed by the stone, their bodies absorbed into the walls, their souls bound to the labyrinth, forever part of the hall's unending watch. And now it was my turn. The book's pages began to turn faster, the symbols becoming more frenzied, almost manic in their speed. The walls of the room seemed to pulse with life, the carvings twisting and contorting, forming new shapes, new faces. I could feel them watching me, waiting, as if they, too, were part of this process, this merging of consciousness. I understood then, the halls did not simply claim those who entered it. It transformed them, fused them into the labyrinth, turning them into something else entirely. The ancient kingdom, the rulers, the fallen explorers, they were not gone. They lived on, not in bodies, but in the stone, in the whispers that filled the air, in the pulse of the labyrinth's heart. I was becoming one of them. The power surged through me like a wave, overwhelming, suffocating. I felt my body begin to shift, to change. My limbs trembled, and my mind expanded, growing in ways I could not control. The crystal in my chest burned with an intensity that threatened to consume me. But through it all, the whispers persisted, guiding me, urging me forward. And then, as if in response to my acceptance, the labyrinth itself seemed to open, revealing the full extent of its hidden depths. I saw tunnels that stretched for miles, vast chambers filled with forgotten treasures, the remnants of the kingdom's grandeur. But there was something else, too, something darker, more malevolent, lurking in the deepest corners of the halls. Presence. It was not the throne, nor the ruler, but something far older, something that had existed in the halls long before the kingdom had been built. It was the true heart of the labyrinth, the source of its power, and it had been waiting for someone like me. Someone who could endure, someone who could complete the transformation. The whispers grew louder, frantic now. Do not resist. You are the final piece. Complete the cycle. I stepped forward, my body now moving with a fluidity I had not known before, as if the stone beneath my feet was guiding my every motion. The presence in the depths called to me, its power drawing me closer. I could feel its hunger, its desire to consume, to shape me into something more than human. But I was no longer just a mortal, no longer just an explorer. I was part of the halls now, part of the labyrinth. My mind was no longer my own, but intertwined with the ancient consciousness of the kingdom. I had become both prisoner and ruler, a piece of the stone, a shard of the eternal darkness. The final passage opened before me, leading deeper into the heart of the halls, into the presence that had called me here. The whispers faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my very bones. I knew what I had to do. I entered the heart of the labyrinth. The heart of the labyrinth was nothing like the chambers that had preceded it. There was no light here, no crystal to guide my path, no whispers urging me forward. Only darkness, thick and oppressive, a void so complete that even the shadows seemed afraid to linger. The pulse of the crystal in my chest was the only anchor I had left, its rhythmic beat the only constant in this realm of forgotten things. As I moved deeper, the air grew colder, the silence stretching around me like a suffocating cloak. It felt as though the halls themselves were holding their breath, watching, waiting. I could feel the presence, that ancient, terrible force that had drawn me here, coiling in the depths ahead. It was not a physical entity, but something older, deeper, something older than the kingdom that had once ruled these dark corridors. It was the heart of the labyrinth, the source of its power, and I was its chosen, its new vessel. I walked for what felt like hours, though time had long ceased to hold meaning. My body moved without thought, guided by something far beyond my own will. The crystal pulsed in time with the beat of the labyrinth's heart, resonating in my chest with each passing step. It was the only sound I could hear, the only sensation that mattered. The labyrinth was a living, breathing entity, and I was becoming a part of it. My thoughts, my memories, my soul, everything that I had once been, was being folded into the fabric of this dark world. And then, finally, I reached it. A vast chamber lay before me, so large that its true size was impossible to comprehend. The walls were smooth, perfectly reflective, like the surface of a still pond, yet the reflections were not my own. Instead, they showed glimpses of the kingdom that had once ruled here, fleeting images of rulers long dead, their faces twisted in expressions of madness, terror, or bliss. I saw cities rise and fall, battles waged and lost, lives consumed by the very stones they had built. In the center of the chamber stood a throne, larger than any I had seen before. It was not made of obsidian, but of a strange black crystal that seemed to pulse with its own internal light, casting long shadows that stretched across the chamber. And sitting upon that throne was a figure, cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct, shifting with the very air around it. It was the ruler of the halls. The figure's presence was suffocating, its power pressing in from all sides, filling the chamber with a weight that I could barely bear. The air crackled with its energy, the very fabric of reality warping in its wake. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend the enormity of what I was facing, but there was no understanding, no clarity. Only the overwhelming sensation of being in the presence of something ancient, something vast beyond measure. And then it spoke. Its voice was not a sound, but a sensation, a ripple that passed through my body and mind, an echo that reverberated in every fiber of my being. You have come far, mortal, farther than any before you, but you still do not understand. I tried to speak, but no words came. The crystal in my chest burned, its pulse quickening, as though it were reaching out to the ruler, as though it were a bridge between us. I felt the weight of its gaze upon me, penetrating, all-knowing. You were chosen because you could endure, the voice continued, its tone heavy with inevitability. Because you could withstand the madness, the hunger, the temptation of the halls. You have walked the labyrinth just as those before you did. But unlike them, you did not falter. You did not break. The ruler's form shifted again, the darkness swirling around it like smoke. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw a face. More a mask than anything real, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The shadow that filled the chamber was its true form, an entity beyond comprehension, beyond mortal understanding. And now you are mine, the voice said, and there was a finality in those words that left no room for doubt. You will take your place, just as they did before you, just as I did before them. The throne shifted, the crystal groaning as if alive, and I felt the pull, the weight of the throne's power. It was irresistible, like gravity, drawing me closer, forcing me to kneel before it. The crystal in my chest pulsed violently, its energy overwhelming, surging through my body, filling my mind with visions of the labyrinth, the kingdom, and the creatures that had once ruled here. I saw their faces, their memories, their thoughts, no longer separate, but all fused together into a single consciousness. It was the throne's will, the labyrinth's design, and it was now mine as well. I understood then. The halls did not simply consume. It did not claim its victims outright. It merged them, transformed them into something greater, something eternal. The rulers who had once sat upon this throne were not gone. They were part of the stone, part of the labyrinth itself. And now I too was becoming one with it. I was becoming the throne, the kingdom, the halls. The power surged within me, filling the emptiness that had once been my soul. I felt my body begin to change, to solidify into something more than human. The crystal at my chest fused with my flesh, its warmth becoming my own. The voices of the dead explorers, the fallen rulers, the creatures of the labyrinth, they all spoke to me now, their thoughts becoming my own. The halls had claimed me, and in doing so, it had made me its ruler. I felt the weight of the kingdom's knowledge settle into my mind. The history of the halls, the secrets of the labyrinth, the forgotten truths of the kingdom. It was all there, laid bare before me. I saw the world as it had once been, a realm of shadow and light, of stone and blood. I saw the fall of the kingdom, the rebellion of the stone itself, the sealing of the halls to preserve its power. And I saw the truth, that the kingdom had never truly fallen. It had only been waiting for someone who could endure the labyrinth's trials, someone who could become part of it, someone who could take the throne and rule it once again. And now that someone was me. The power of the labyrinth surged through my veins, and I felt the walls of the halls shift, the stone groaning with a newfound energy. The kingdom had been dormant, but it was alive again. The throne had chosen me, and in return, I had become it. The labyrinth was no longer a prison. It was my domain, my kingdom, and I was its ruler. The figure on the throne, the ruler of the halls, was gone. There was no need for it anymore. I was the new ruler now, and the halls were mine to command. The whispers, the shadows, the labyrinth itself, they all bent to my will. I had become the heart of the Obsidian Halls, the pulse that sustained it, the ruler who would carry its legacy forward. And so, the cycle would continue. The labyrinth would call to those who sought its secrets, those who were drawn to its darkness. And when they entered, they would walk the same path I had walked, face the same trials, endure the same transformation. Some would break, some would fall, but others, like me, would rise. They would take their place among the shadows, among the stone, and they would rule the halls, just as I would. The kingdom had waited for me, and now it would wait for them. I sat upon the throne, or rather, I was the throne now. The weight of the stone pressed into my mind, its rhythm now the pulse of my very being. The walls of the halls seemed to breathe with me, as though the entire labyrinth was alive, syncing with my every thought, every breath. The shadows, the whispers, they all felt different now. They were mine. They no longer whispered in fear or desperation. They whispered in reverence. It was strange, this sensation of power, to rule not as a mere human but as something other, something more. My body felt different, too. Not just the crystal fused to my chest, but the way my limbs moved, the way my senses expanded. I could feel every inch of the labyrinth now, every crack in the walls, every shifting stone. It was as though the entire kingdom was embedded in my mind. I was both its ruler and its prisoner, bound to its endless cycles, to its dark heart. I stood from the throne, my form shifting and stretching, as though my body had grown to match the immensity of the labyrinth. The chamber before me seemed smaller, almost insignificant. My senses stretched beyond the walls of this chamber, into the farthest reaches of the halls. The dark corridors were no longer a mystery. They were paths to be followed, veins of power that led deeper into the labyrinth's core. I could feel them now, the others who had entered the halls, the ones who had fallen before me, their spirits trapped within the walls, their memories forever intertwined with the labyrinth. I could hear their whispers, faint at first, but growing louder, clearer, as if they were calling out to me. They were not like the voices I had heard before, the ones that had tormented me during my journey. These were not pleas for help. These were not cries of despair. They were fragments of their former selves, and they were waiting for me. "Do you remember us?" the voices asked, soft but insistent. "Do you remember when you were one of us?" I did not respond, but I felt them, their longing, their desperation. They were part of me now as I was part of them. I could feel their presence, 1,000 souls trapped in the labyrinth, each one a fragment of the kingdom's past, each one a whisper in the dark. And as I walked through the corridors, they followed me, their forms flickering at the edges of my vision, waiting for the moment when I would claim them, when I would make them part of the cycle once more. I came to a vast hall, its ceiling lost in darkness. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the ground was uneven, littered with broken shards of glass-like obsidian. The walls here were covered in carvings, twisted depictions of creatures that seemed both human and monstrous, their bodies contorted in unnatural poses, their faces locked in expressions of agony and ecstasy. It was as though the kingdom itself had been built not just from stone, but from the suffering of those who had lived within it. The voices grew louder as I stepped forward, and then I saw it. A shape moving in the shadows, tall and thin, a figure draped in robes made of shifting darkness. It was one of the former rulers of the kingdom, a phantom, a memory trapped in the stone. It was waiting for me, its hollow eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You have come," it said, its voice a low murmur that echoed through my mind. "You have taken the throne. You are one of us now. But there is more. There is always more." I felt the weight of its gaze, the expectation in its words. There was always more. The labyrinth was never truly satisfied. It was always hungry, always waiting for the next soul to enter, to complete the cycle. The rulers before me had not been content with their power. They had sought more. More knowledge, more dominion, more life. But in the end, they had fallen, consumed by the very power they sought to control. "Do you understand what you have become?" the figure asked, its voice growing colder. "Do you understand what it means to rule this place?" I paused, feeling the pulse of the labyrinth, the steady rhythm that thrummed in my chest, that filled my mind. I was no longer a mere mortal. I had become the labyrinth's heart. But what did that truly mean? What did it mean to be both ruler and prisoner? To possess such power and yet be bound to this place forever? I took a step forward, and the figure in the shadows recoiled, its form flickering like a fading dream. "You are not ready," it whispered, its voice distant now, fading like smoke. "No one is ever ready." But I had no time for its warnings. I was already too far gone, already bound to the labyrinth in ways I could not yet fully comprehend. The figure was nothing more than another echo of the past, another fragment of a forgotten ruler who had once sat upon this throne. I had surpassed it. I was the new ruler and the halls were mine. The chamber around me began to shift. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling lowering, the shadows thickening. The halls were alive, responding to my presence, reshaping themselves to suit my will. I could feel the labyrinth's pulse quicken, its hunger growing, as if it were waiting for something more. And then I saw it, a door or perhaps a portal at the far end of the chamber. It shimmered with an otherworldly light, its edges rippling like water, and as I approached, the voices grew louder, more frantic. The whispers of the dead, the trapped souls, the rulers who had come before me. They were all calling to me, urging me to open it. "You must go through," they said, their voices a cacophony in my mind. "You must complete the cycle. The labyrinth will never be whole without you." I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I grasped the door's edge. The crystal in my chest pulsed violently, as if warning me, as if reminding me of the price that awaited. But I could not stop. The hunger inside me, the need to understand, to control, to transcend was too great. I pulled the door open, and the darkness beyond swallowed me whole. Beyond the door lay nothing but a vast chasm, an infinite expanse of darkness so thick it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air was different here, dense with a strange, suffocating pressure that pressed against my skin, as if the very atmosphere of this place was intent on crushing me. Felt my breath catch in my chest, the crystal in my chest vibrating violently as if reacting to the void before me. The doorway had closed behind me, and as I stepped forward, the ground beneath my feet shifted. It was no longer the smooth obsidian of the labyrinth. The stone had transformed, becoming fluid, like black water, rippling and shifting beneath my weight. It felt wrong, alien, and the further I walked, the less I felt like a person and more like an extension of the labyrinth itself. It was as though I was dissolving into the stone, becoming one with the very essence of the place. The whispers returned, but they were no longer comforting or familiar. They were louder now, more frantic. They scratched at the edges of my mind, clawing at my sanity, urging me to turn back, to abandon the path I had set upon. You cannot go further, they hissed. The cycle cannot be completed. Not by you. But I did not stop. I could feel the power of the labyrinth coiling around me, its hunger pressing against my bones. It was calling me, drawing me forward. The throne, the halls, the crystal, they were all a part of it. I had to complete it. I had to fulfill the purpose I had been chosen for. There was no turning back. As I walked, the darkness began to shift, coalescing into shapes, indistinct forms that loomed in the periphery of my vision. They were watching me. I could feel their eyes upon me, though I saw nothing but the void. The pulse of the labyrinth grew stronger, its rhythm quickening, as if it, too, was eager for what was to come. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint glow, a flickering light that seemed to pulse in time with the beat of the crystal in my chest. It was a doorway, not like the one I had passed through, but a grand archway carved from the same black crystal that now coursed through my veins. The door shimmered with an ethereal light, casting strange shadows across the chasm. I could feel the power radiating from it, an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. This was the final threshold. Beyond it lay the heart of the labyrinth, the source of its dark power. I reached the archway and stepped through it. The world around me shifted, warping, and for a moment, everything was still. My breath caught in my throat, and the crystal pulsed so loudly in my chest that it drowned out all other sound. I felt a pressure build in my mind, a weight that seemed to bear down on my very consciousness. The labyrinth was pressing against me, its will demanding I submit to it completely. But I had already surrendered. I was the labyrinth now. I was the ruler. And this was the culmination. The space before me was like nothing I had ever seen. It was not a chamber, not a hall, but a vast, endless void. A place outside of time, outside of reality. The very concept of space itself seemed to warp and bend, like the inside of a dream or a nightmare. The walls, if they could even be called that, were shifting, not made of stone, but of something far more alien, like tendrils of darkness that slithered and twisted, pulsating with an energy I could neither comprehend nor resist. In the center of the void stood a figure. At first, I thought it was just another phantom, another spirit bound to the labyrinth. But as I drew closer, I realized that it was something more, something greater. The figure was draped in robes of shifting shadow, its face obscured by a mask of obsidian, its body towering and formless, more an embodiment of the labyrinth than any being I had ever known. It radiated power, a presence so immense that it made my chest tighten, my mind reel. This was not a ruler. This was the labyrinth itself in its purest form. It spoke, though its lips did not move. Its voice filled the void, resonating within my bones. You have come far, mortal, farther than any before you. But do you understand what you have become? The words reverberated in my mind, crashing through my thoughts like a tidal wave. My body, no longer merely flesh, responded instinctively, a reflex born from the stone that had merged with me. The crystal pulsed, and the labyrinth itself trembled, as if acknowledging the presence of this greater entity. I wanted to answer, to speak, but no words came. The weight of the question pressed upon me, suffocating, as though this entity already knew the answer. It already knew what I had become. Do you understand that the labyrinth is not just a place? The voice continued. It is a consciousness, a force that predates everything you have known. It has consumed countless souls, reshaped them, made them part of itself. It has existed for eons, feeding on those who dare to walk its halls, shaping them into something else. I could feel the power of the labyrinth swirling around me, its energy growing stronger with each passing second. It was calling me to complete the cycle, to take my place in its eternal, unyielding heart. You have endured, the voice whispered, and I felt a strange warmth wash over me. But endurance is not enough. You must surrender. You must become. I understood then. The labyrinth did not need just a ruler. It needed someone who could fully embrace its hunger, who could surrender to its power completely, without hesitation. The rulers who had come before me had been weak, clinging to their humanity, seeking power but never fully submitting. That was why they had failed. I had not failed, but I was not yet complete. I was not yet whole. I felt the crystal at my chest pulse violently, a surge of power coursing through my veins. The shadows around me thickened, pressing in on all sides, as if the labyrinth itself was about to consume me. And in that moment I knew what I had to do. Do you accept your place? The voice asked a final challenge. Do you accept the eternal cycle? I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of the labyrinth, the weight of its power. The cycle was endless, an unbroken loop of consumption and rebirth. The rulers before me had been consumed, their memories and power twisted into the labyrinth's very essence. They had thought themselves immortal, but in truth, they had simply become another piece of the stone, another whisper in the dark. They had never truly ruled. They had only fed the hunger of the labyrinth. But I was different. I would not just be a ruler. I would become the labyrinth. I would take its heart, its power, and merge with it completely. I would transcend. I would not be consumed. I would be the hunger itself. The darkness around me thickened, and I felt the shadows wrap around my form, pressing into my mind, into my soul. The crystal in my chest flared, its energy surging to match the pulse of the labyrinth, and I surrendered. Not to the throne, not to the ruler, but to the labyrinth itself. I embraced its hunger, its endless cycle, and in doing so, I became a part of it. The void before me shattered, the darkness folding in on itself. I felt myself stretching, expanding, until I was no longer sure where I ended and the labyrinth began. The power of the stone, of the crystal, of the halls, it was all a part of me now. The voice, the presence was gone, but I could feel it deep inside me. The labyrinth was not a place. It was not a kingdom. It was a consciousness, and now I was a part of it. The cycle would continue, as it always had, drawing in new souls, reshaping them, making them a part of the stone. I would rule, yes, but I would also consume. And when the next soul entered the labyrinth, I would be waiting. I would guide them, just as the labyrinth had guided me. I had become the labyrinth, and the cycle had begun again.